To introduce our next topic, the temperature check, managing a workforce during a pandemic. We have Rob Tidd, the Senior Vice President and Chief Operations Counsel with Pacific Premier Bank. Rob, I hand it off to you.
Great, thank you, Mike. I have the pleasure of introducing our next speakers for this panel, Candace Gomez and Paul Amante Jr. Candace is a shareholder with the law firm Ogletree Deakins. She represents and counsels employers of all sizes in employment and labor matters. She has experience in multiple industries, including but not limited to retail, banking, real estate, construction, and technology in both state and federal court and before federal and state administrative agencies. In addition to defending employers, Candace works closely with management, human resources departments, in-house counsel, and business owners to provide day-to-day advice and counsel on a variety of workplace issues and to prevent employment litigation. And I will say Candace has been employment counsel for Pacific Premier Bank for many years now and has always done a great job for us in obtaining positive results for the bank. Next, we have Paul. For the past 4.5 years, Paul has served in an HR leadership role at Irvine Company, a private real estate investor with approximately 3 for compliance, employee relations. Paul ensures compliance with all labor laws and regulations through policy design, implementation, and audit. For the past year, he has served on the company's COVID-19 response task force to assist in navigating the complexities of managing a workforce during these unusual times. So like Mike said, our panel description or our panel is titled Temperature Check, Managing a Workforce During a Pandemic. And, this is just a topic that all of us are grappling with right now, whether as employers, managers, or even personally as employees. So, during this past year, the world we live in as we once knew it has been turned upside down due to the pandemic, and employers are no exception. So in our discussion, Candace and Paul are going to be covering, a host of hot topics many employers are currently grappling with, such as including returning employees safely to the office, continued use of masks and social distancing, requiring vaccines or making it optional, flex time and remote work, time off policies, including sick and supplemental pay, and handling complaints from employees who do not feel safe returning to the workplace. So a lot to cover today. So I will turn it over to Candace and Paul. Thank you, guys.
Great. Thank you, Rob. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Speaking of housing, I'm actually in a new home that I just bought, and I've only been here for 1 week. So I'm crossing my fingers we don't have any internet glitches or anything of that nature. But it's a pleasure to be speaking today. Before we jump in, and we do have a lot to cover, before we jump in, I do want to brag for a moment about Paul Amante, my co-speaker. I've had the privilege of working with Paul for many years now. He's incredibly knowledgeable, witty as all heck, not to set the bar too high right now, but always has a good story to tell, or as I like to say, he's really a hoot, and I really enjoy working with him. And no, he does not hire outside legal counsel, and he doesn't pay Ogletree's invoices. So this is not a paid advertisement of Paul. But he's extremely knowledgeable in these issues. So
I just want to make sure I'm on.
Oh, I think I hear somebody. But I just wanted to do that, mention to Paul and to thank him for his time. He has been living and breathing COVID as much as I've been living and breathing COVID and with his company. So thank you, Paul. Before I ask him the first question that I want to ask him, I do need to give a quick legal disclaimer. Would not be an attorney talking without a legal disclaimer, right? So I want to make sure you all understand that I'm a California attorney, licensed in California, practiced in California. Paul Amante works in California as well. I have never, in almost 20 years of practicing law, experienced so much divergence in requirements as with COVID for employers. whether it's mask mandates, temperature checks, social distancing, vaccines. It's just been insanity. Trying to keep up with state law, federal law, local ordinances, health orders. Sometimes they all contradict each other, and you're like, how do we advise our clients and our employers? So I just want to make it very clear before we start talking, we are clearly coming from a California perspective and a California bent. So wherever you're located, and if you're outside of California, I'm jealous because in California we have so many requirements. Keep in mind that a lot of the COVID requirements for employers are not only state specific. You also have to keep in mind any local orders. I'm in Orange County, Paul's in Orange County. There are specific ordinances that apply to San Diego, that might apply to Los Angeles. So it's really important that you know where you are located and the ordinances and the laws that are being subject to that particular location for your organization. Perfect example would be Santa Clara County. That is a county in California, and it just came out with a new health order and mandate that's restrictive might not be the right word, but it requires a host of different things, including making sure that all employers in that county determine or record whether their employees have been vaccinated or not. And if they ask an employee whether they've been vaccinated and they decline to answer that question, then they need to be noted as unvaccinated for that purpose. And if you're in Santa Clara County, you have to report that back to the health department by June 1. You also have to make sure all employees who have not been vaccinated wear masks to work. So that's just one example of one county in California, one state with a very specific requirement. So now that my legal disclaimer is out of the way, I'm going to jump in to Paul, and I'm going to ask Paul, a very loaded question, which is, what is a big or the largest challenge that you have found in returning employees to the workforce as a result of COVID?
Yeah, well, let me start off by saying we operate in Santa Clara County as one of the counties we operate in. So I'm well aware of the nightmare in dealing with the new Santa Clara ordinance, especially in light of the impending directives from Cal OSHA. We're expecting a new draft tomorrow and adoption by the Standards Board on June 3rd. So it is a nightmare trying to weave all the different requirements from local, state, and regulatory commissions and making them all work. I think there are a host of issues that are difficult when we're talking about returning to the workplace. And I think the momentum is moving in the direction of bringing people back. It's been, a little over a year that we've been out due to the pandemic. We have some relief in terms of the CDC guidance on when you need to wear a mask and when you need to socially distance, whether or not you've been vaccinated. Again, Cal OSHA is coming out with their workplace rules and requirements redrafted tomorrow afternoon. We're anticipating them. So the biggest questions that we have is, what's it going to look like if I have to come back to the office? Do I need to wear a mask? Will I have a private space to work in? Do I still need to socially distance? So what is the work dynamic going to be when I return to the office? And really part and parcel of that is the masking requirement, whether you're vaccinated or not vaccinated. Do we require a vaccination or don't we require it? Do we require proof? Is that requirement only going to be voluntary? So it's not going to be mandatory, but we would like you to tell us whether or not you've been vaccinated. That we're trying to navigate. I think dealing with the continued request for hybrid or flexible work environments. Hey, for the past year and a half, I've been working home. I've been highly productive. Why do I have to come back into the office? Why can't I continue to work from home? And then how do we deal with the outliers? Those being that have a legitimate reason for requesting an accommodation, either medical or religious, and those outliers which are, I just don't want to wear a mask or I just don't want to come into the office. How do you deal with those situations? And then being able to, at the same time you're navigating all of that, make sure you have an engaged workforce, that the employee value proposition is there so that in coming back to work, they feel that they're valued. for the work they provide, but also that we're really cognizant of their health and safety to make sure they're going to be safe when they do return to the office. So just a whole lot there.
So let me ask you a burning question, and this is something that I know employers are having trouble with since I advise employers day in and day out. How are you in the Irvine Management Company, dealing with those employees who do not want to come back to work? And I understand that there could be a situation where it's, health related or childcare related, but how are you dealing with those employees who say, look, I've been working from home for a year, I've been doing a good job, I want to keep doing it? How do you respond to those? Because I know this is a big hot topic issue right now that a lot of employers are facing. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, and it's a value statement that you need to come up with as your organization as to why you're going to return to a work from the office or work at a work site as opposed to a home model. So for every company, it's going to be different depending on what it is you do. At Irvine Company, we operate apartment communities. We build, we operate, we maintain them. We have a resort division, so we operate resort properties and golf courses. We have office property division that builds and operates Class A office buildings throughout the state. And we have land sales and home building, and we have retail like Irvine Spectrum, Tustin Marketplace, Fashion Island. Those are some of our major retail centers. So part of our value proposition back to the employees is that the type of work that we do is necessarily providing spaces to live, eat, work, and play that are not necessarily at home. If you're going to stay at a hotel, you have to go to the hotel. If you're going to rent an apartment, you have to go to the apartment community. If you're going to be working in an office environment, you have to go to that office. So part of our value proposition is, well, we're in the business of building spaces for people to work not at home. And so it's somewhat disingenuous to say, we're going to lease office space at, Irvine Spectrum or Fashion Island for businesses to operate, and it's good for them to go into those buildings and to work, but we, as the company providing that space, are not going to do that. We also talk a lot about the unique nature of our business, the type of clientele that we have, and the properties that we develop, the team approach, being able to interact with your colleagues on a daily basis and not on a Zoom call, and being able to do that instant collaboration one-on-one is very essential and necessary. But we're still left with the one or two that says, yeah, but I'm a staff accountant, and all I do is I count beans, and I can count the beans at my dining room table as easily as I can in my cubicle in your office. And those we just have to deal with one-on-one to say, let's dig a little bit deeper as to why they need that flexibility. Sometimes it turns out it's a child care issue. They have a continuing issue with not being able to find good child care right now, and they can't return to the office. And we're applying individual flexibility where we can, with a goal toward eventually returning our workforce to the office environment.
So what about the employee who says, I can't come back to work because you're going to make me wear a mask, and I have a medical condition preventing me from wearing a mask, and so I need to keep working remotely? How does the company deal with somebody like that, which is also a very common issue that I'm coming across?
Yeah. So the one thing that you said, which would throw up the red flag to me, is medical condition and I can't wear a mask. So we would initially deal with that under ADA, FEHA, as an accommodation request. We would go through the interactive process in good faith and allow that to play out to determine whether or not there is a disability for which we need to provide an accommodation, and if so, we work out that reasonable accommodation. I will tell you though, interesting story that happened, didn't really happen, but we'll pretend that it happened recently here at Irvine Company. We had an employee that we indicated, it's now time for you to return to the office. We want to have your role back customer facing, and we'd like you to come back. And so we got a doctor's note for that individual that said they can't wear a face mask. We went back and said, okay, no problem. One of the alternatives that Cal OSHA and CDPH has set up is you can wear a face shield with a drape, and that will allow you not to have to wear a mask in the workplace. Literally that same afternoon, we got a new doctor's note that said, this employee cannot wear a face covering of any kind. So we went back the next morning and said, no problem, we will give you a private office for you to work in, even though normally you work in a cubicle. You can work in a private enclosed room, and under the Cal OSHA rules that are currently in effect, you don't need to wear a face covering if you're in your individual office. That afternoon, we got another doctor's note from the same doctor that said, this employee must work at home. And so now we're dealing with the escalating doctor's notes that are changing over time, where clearly the agenda was this employee did not want to return to the office. And we could have thrown up our hands at that point and said, well, there's nothing we can do, just allow the employee to continue to work from home. But we decided to take one more stab at it. So we asked the employee if they could go back to their doctor and say, is there a period of time within which they could wear a face covering? For example, walking through the common area to get to their office, or walking through the common area to use the restroom. And we got a new doctor's note that said, yes, we can allow the employee to wear a face mask for a limited period of time. So it was a long process, but sometimes the interactive process under ADA is a long process. And it's interactive for a reason. It's not a one-shot, they make a request, we grant or deny it. We do have to have that iterative approach going back and forth. We as the employer can make recommended accommodations which will meet the requirements of the physician restrictions. We don't have to accept what the physician is suggesting, but we do have to go through that process. And through everything that we're dealing with COVID, ADA and fair housing and employment did not go away in terms of ADA accommodation. Same thing with religious accommodation. Now, that's the first way we would deal with that situation. Let's assume we eliminate medical or religious accommodation reasons for the reluctance to wear a face mask. Then at that point, what we do is we usually point back to our health and safety plan, which we put into place as a result of the OSHA requirements, that we're fully compliant with what OSHA requires in the workplace. We are also compliant with what CDC recommendations are. We try to weave those into our health and safety plan as well. Determine if there are any other objections to returning and wearing the face mask. And if there are none, we say, well, unfortunately, your position is in the office. We need you to return by a date certain. We'll give you some time to work out any other issues you have. And so far, we've been successful in having returned all of those employees to the workplace, except for one in the past year where there was a continuing reluctance to return to the office. And rather than terminating that employment saying, sorry, you can't comply with what we need you to do, you're gone, we asked the employee if they wanted a personal leave of absence beyond our normal 30-day limit per year. They indicated yes, and we continually extended that personal leave of absence until they felt comfortable returning to the office. Now, all of this is going to change relatively soon because the draft OSHA regulations are going toward the direction that if you're fully vaccinated, you're not required to wear a face covering in the office if you're around other people who are fully vaccinated. So devil will be in the details when we see the final regulations, but that's the direction we're moving in right now.
Yeah. So an important point to highlight to our audience, in case you can't tell or couldn't pick up on this. So Paul Amante is a lawyer trained, even though he's not practicing law in his capacity or my management company. And he hit upon very important legal issues just now in his response that is worth highlighting to the group, which is when you have an employee who says, I can't come back to the office because I can't wear a mask and I have a medical condition preventing me from doing so. As I'm sure your HR team is fully aware, you can't just say too bad, too sad. You have to do something called engage in the interactive process with that employee. You have to determine whether there's a reasonable accommodation that you can provide to them, which is what Paul was discussing just now. And then you need to really try to work with that employee. And I think what Paul was just saying, and what is a good point to that story, is that you can push back when an employee says, oh, I have a health condition, I can't come back to work. Well, that's not just an automatic pass to just say, oh, okay, we'll just let you keep working from home. You are allowed to, as an employer, to engage in the interactive process with them and to ask for further information from the doctor. And to clarify, you actually are required to engage in the interactive process with them, but then you can ask for follow-up information from the doctor. You can provide the job description. You can say, okay, doctor, here's the employee's job description. What kind of accommodations can we provide the employee other than what they're asking for? So you can push back as an employer on that topic. So I think that's an important, very important point to mention. The other thing I want to mention from what Paul just said is we've got here in California, we have Cal OSHA, as he mentioned, that is going to be coming out with new safety regulations or new regulations for employers. Coincidentally, that's tomorrow. So we are, a lot of what we're going to tell you today might be just tossed out the window tomorrow when OSHA I mean, the timing is, this is what I'm talking about with COVID. It's just been fluid and changing constantly. So tomorrow, check, Google or, check Ogletree, website, because we're going to be having, I'm sure, a bunch of stuff on our website and blogs and all that. We're all anxiously awaiting these draft regulations that are going to come out tomorrow in California. It's going to be open for public comment and opinion. The hearing is not until June 3rd, so there's a little bit of time for people to comment on the proposed regulations. Ogletree is planning on having attorneys attend the hearing and testify at the hearing regarding the proposed regulations. And then if you're interested in, or you have HR folks interested in learning more about that, they can attend. We have a webinar June 4 that Ogletree is going to have regarding those new regulations, because you're going to want to make sure your organization, if you operate in California, that you are aware of those regulations and that you are following them. So let me just throw that out there.
Quick point on that, Candace. We have been preparing for a return to the office probably a week after we put our workforce working from home. We've had a return to office plan that we're probably on our 9th or 10th or 100th iteration of that plan. And as we hear about all of these new rules coming out, OSHA Standards Board in California was supposed to adopt these guidelines on the 20th of April. And they got pulled back at the last minute because of the new CDC guidance relaxing the mask requirements, and because of the governor's pronouncement about the same thing in California Department of Public Health. So OSHA asked their own standards board withhold voting on April 20th on these new regulations. We're going to give you a new cut on the 28th, which is tomorrow, that they're going to vote on, as Candace mentioned, on June 3rd to be effective on June 15th. We expect that they'll probably be a little bit more relaxed than what they've already drafted because of the timing when they held it back. But you have to be in front of the curve, because part of these regulations put the mandate on the employer, if you're going to treat somebody as fully vaccinated, to have documentation. Well, you need to be able to gather that documentation, put it into some type of database, make sure you maintain confidentiality so that you know which of your workers qualify as fully vaccinated and will not have to wear a mask, and which do not. And that's a very heavy lift. So to the extent you can get in front of it, you're going to be much better off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I have to commend Irvine Management Company for, I know you have a coronavirus task force that you've been a part of, and you all have been ahead of the game since day one. So that's really good. And I would encourage any organization, listening here, it is really important to have a designated person, I think, or people on your team who can keep track of all of these changes, because they are constant. If you are a national employer, then you really need to keep track of these issues, because they differ from state to state. For example, in Arizona, I understand that some localities lifted the mask mandate for employers. Well, that's not the case if you're in California. So you need to make sure that you're staying up to date on each state and each locality, whether you're consulting outside counsel, whether you're reviewing some sort of blog or whatever it is. You just want to make sure that you're staying up to date on all the changes, because there are a lot and they're constant. So one question I have for you, Paul, which isn't necessarily regarding employees per se directly, but it does indirectly. How does the company deal with customers or guests who show up and don't want to wear a mask because maybe they claim they have a medical reason, maybe they say they have a constitutional right to breathe? I mean, I've heard it all.
Right.
What is your reaction to that, or what's the company's reaction to that? How have you been dealing with that situation?
And that's a very good question, because as you mentioned earlier, it varies from locale to locale. So Santa Clara County in Northern California has one set of rules with regard to masking up while you're in public and going into businesses, where Orange County and San Diego have different rules, or Los Angeles, and we operate in all of those areas. Currently, we do require that individuals that come into any of our facilities do wear a mask. And we have pretty good compliance, but we do have those that will come in just not wearing a mask. We train our employees to courteously ask them to put on a mask, that we have a requirement to have a mask in that location. That usually will take care of the trick. But we ask them not to be confrontive of anybody who absolutely refuses to wear a mask. And so we've had very, very little concern with that. Where we deal with it a lot more is in our outdoor retail centers. So Irvine Spectrum, Fashion Island, Marketplace, and all of our community centers, shopping centers that'll have a variety of different businesses. Up until recently, in the outdoor area, we still did require face masks to be worn, although that has been eased with a lot of the local ordinances and regulations, and now allowing for those who are fully vaccinated, maintaining distance from others, not to have to wear a mask. So we're starting to evolve toward, not having the mask in outdoor areas, and soon to be in indoor areas, I assume. But then the problem becomes, how do you know who's fully vaccinated and is allowed not to wear a mask? And how do you know the others who are not on that list?
Exactly. So you brought up an excellent point that I want to make sure everyone here knows, is the training aspect. Training your employees to know what to do when someone enters a branch or anything without wearing a mask, and then making sure that the managers are trained on how to handle that situation, I think is so critical. So I don't know about the audience here, but I have a 12-year-old, and so 12-year-olds, they're all about TikTok and YouTube. So we have YouTube playing all the time, and I was horrified to see a YouTube video of a woman in a bank branch who was asked to wear a mask, and I guess she refused, so she was told to leave, and then she started screaming, and I was watching this going, oh my gosh. I hope this was fake. I hope this was like a setup and not like a real incident. But the key takeaway from that is, you don't want employees chasing customers saying, you need to leave, you're not wearing a mask. You don't want customers chasing other customers. You have to wear a mask, You want to avoid that situation. And how do you avoid that situation? By not letting it escalate to that point to begin with. You have employees trained. Let's just say it's a bank teller. They're trained to say, will you please, wear a mask? We have a policy. And then if the customer says, oh, I can't wear a mask because I have a medical condition, I'm exempt. And they, give you the fake ADA exempt cards that are going around these days that kind of make me laugh because they're not legitimate. But anyway, they say they have a medical condition. I don't have to wear a mask. Well, now what? Well, make sure your employee doesn't just say, well, I'm not going to help you. You need to wear a mask, but I'm not going to help you. And yes, employees have done that because they weren't adequately trained. And now you are going to come into an Americans with Disabilities Act situation, because if the customer truly does have a medical condition, then the employer, the organization, has a responsibility to try to reasonably accommodate that customer. So it might look like a branch supervisor coming to the customer with their card and saying, here's my card, here's my direct number. You know, if there's something that you can maybe do online, I can walk you through it on the internet. We also have an ATM machine outside that you might be able to utilize, and, you know, treat the customer with respect, not being, you know, confrontational or demanding. That could have helped probably avoid the YouTube disaster that I was watching not too long ago. And I thought, oh, this is awful. That is not the sort of PR your organization wants to have floating around YouTube. So, so thank you for mentioning the training point. I think that is really critical, that your employees are trained on what to do when you have that sort of situation arise. So now let's go to the vaccination issue, which I know is a really hot topic for a lot of employers. I think that one key question a lot of people have, and that there seems to be a lot of misconception or confusion about, is, can my employer require me to get a vaccine? And you have got some people who think that no, they can't. I can tell you that the Department of Fair Employment and Housing in California has made it pretty clear that employers can require their employees in California to get vaccinated, as long as it is one of the three that have been approved for emergency use. Now, with that said, it might not be a good idea for you as an employer to mandate that for various reasons. A while ago, it was the concern regarding supply. We didn't want to have to require employees to get the vaccine because, you know, there was limited supply. We needed to make sure the elderly were getting the shots first, that sort of thing. But you also could be facing a workforce that just is skeptical of the vaccine. They don't feel like it's safe. They don't feel like it's been tested properly, whatever the reason is. They could have a medical reason for not wanting it. They could have a religious reason for not wanting it. So how are you, Paul, and how's the Irvine Management Company dealing with the vaccine issue?
Yeah, so on the issue of whether or not we can mandate it, both EEOC and DFEH have said, yes, you can, as an employer, mandate a vaccine for your employees in the workplace, although there are a variety of opinions as to whether or not, if that's challenged, that would hold up. And there have been a lot of opinions on both sides of that, although most opinions land on, yes, you can mandate it. We really don't want to be the tip of the spear. We don't want to be the employer that is the test case as to whether or not that standard is going to be enforced. And we don't think we need to go there. So we as a company are at this point not going to mandate that our employees become vaccinated. However, in light of the impending OSHA regulations for workplace safety, with the anticipation that fully vaccinated employees will not have to wear a mask in certain circumstances, that's the direction we're going in. And because the draft regulations indicate that the definition of fully vaccinated, there are three parts to that definition. One is that they've received both doses of a 2-dose vaccine or 1 dose for Johnson & Johnson. Number 2 is that the last dose was at least 14 days ago, so they're the 2 weeks after your last dose. And importantly, number 3, that the employer has documentation of your vaccination status. So in order to qualify as fully vaccinated under the draft OSHA regulations, the employer will have to have that proof. And so the direction we're moving in, what we're gearing up toward in anticipation of these regulations being adopted on June 3rd, is a request for voluntary disclosure of vaccination status and voluntary providing your vaccination card so we can verify that and have that documentation. We believe that the vast majority of our workforce will gladly voluntarily disclose that if they've been vaccinated. We're thinking that human nature is, if I've gone to the step of getting that needle stuck in my arm and I'm now fully vaccinated and I may not have to wear a face mask when I return to the office, I'll gladly provide that to my employer. We even went down the rabbit trail of, if we collect these vaccination cards, is it a HIPAA protected disclosure, or do we have HIPAA requirements that we need to comply with in maintaining those vaccination cards? It's out there on the internet as well, but we went to outside counsel, and the opinion was that as long as we're not providing it to our health insurer or any of our health and welfare vendors, for them to use that information for medical purposes, that it would not be a HIPAA protected disclosure of that card. However, we're notifying our employees that we will maintain the confidentiality of that actual card. We'll keep it as confidential, in a same confidential location we would any other HIPAA protected information, to give them a level of assurance that we're just not going to take their card and, put a photocopy of it out on the internet somewhere. Now, we have not yet started to gather that information. We are geared up to, pull the trigger, if you will, on June 3rd, once we have the standard board decide to adopt those regulations. But we're ready to hit the ground running with a communication and a mechanism for our employees to electronically disclose and upload their vaccination card, so we can be gathering that information as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, even Ogletree, my law firm, we've updated our own COVID-19 policies, and I received an email about that just within the last 24 hours that, if you've been vaccinated, click here and upload your vaccination card as proof, and then starting, June, whatever the date is, you can come to the office under, more relaxed requirements. So I do think that the vaccination issue it's a sensitive one, and I can understand that it's sensitive to a lot of employees. What's important for an employer to know when it comes to vaccines is, particularly if there's a religious reason for someone not taking a vaccine or a medical reason for them not taking a vaccine, it's very important that the employer then reasonably accommodate them in that regard. If it's I don't think it's safe sort of situation, and that's the reason why I don't want to take it, for better or for worse, there's really no legal requirement for an employer to engage in the interactive process with that employee. But if they use the buzzwords of it's a religious, firmly held religious belief, or they have a medical exemption, then that's something that the employer does definitely need to look at and accommodate. And I'm sure your HR folks know this, but it's important that they are aware of that and that your managers are aware of that as well. So that's the vaccine issue. So it will be interesting to see what happens in California. As Paul's mentioned already, the CDC has already relaxed guidelines. I think that's what's caused a lot of confusion with employers, is that you have so many different requirements and you don't really know who to listen to and what is my organization subject to. The CDC has relaxed requirements if you've been fully vaccinated, but California has not. So just because the CDC has said something doesn't mean that California is following it. And that's really important for you all to know, that as the CDC comes down with certain requirements or certain guidelines or what have you, it doesn't necessarily mean that that is what you want to follow for your state and for your organization, depending on where you are. So that's
I tried, Candace, with my boss. I said, if I get fully vaccinated, can I get off the COVID task force? And that didn't fly. So I was stuck twice, stuck with the needle and stuck on the task force.
Yeah, that's right. Well, they're lucky to have you on the task force. I think, Paul, there's no doubt, Paul, you know more about COVID-19 than I do. You are living and breathing it every day. You're on the task force. I'm still, advising clients on non-COVID-19, and my litigation practice is still really heavy. I have to say though, and I mean this with no disrespect to anyone out there and not to make light of any of these situations, but when I get a non-COVID related issue, like a harassment issue or a wrongful termination issue from a client, I'm excited because I'm like, oh, thank goodness, it's not COVID related. I am so happy to provide that advice. So that's the
Yeah, me too. I kept my day job too.
Exactly. Time off policy. So I don't think we need to spend a whole lot of time on this, but clearly there are some time off, paid time off that needs to be provided to employees regarding COVID in Los Angeles. I'm sure Paul knows and can speak to this. In Los Angeles, there was a new, I think, requirement or order for paid time for employees to get vaccinated. So for each vaccine, they need to be given time off. But anyway, what time off policies does Irvine Management Company are you following with respect to COVID-19 in the workplace?
Yeah, I think, you know, from our perspective, we tried to be on the forefront of what we anticipated was going to come down. So, you know, statewide in California, we've had 2 versions of supplemental paid sick leave for COVID-related reasons. We had the 2020 version, which expired on 12/31, and then in March they passed a 2021 version retroactive to January 1, which expires on September 30th. But long before the California ordinance was passed, there was some requirement under the federal law for employers of under 500 to provide some supplemental time. Didn't apply to our company because we're over 500. But nevertheless, early on, we decided to have our own supplemental sick leave for COVID-related reasons that we put in place, and I would like to think that Governor Newsom used as a model for his. So we were at the forefront, and the state really caught up with us with what we did. So we were already at the point of providing 80 hours for full-time employees for COVID-related reasons before the 2020 statute was passed. And so it was very easy for us on implementation because with a few minor tweaks, we were able to take our plan and comply it with the California requirements. Similarly, when it expired in December, and we didn't know that there was going to be a 2021 supplemental law, although we anticipated it was going to come eventually, we decided what we would do is we could have done, you know, one of 3 things. We could have said, program's over, there's no supplemental time in 2021. We could have rolled over the unused time and said, yeah, even though the state law expired on 12/31, we're going to roll over unused time and you can use it in 2021. Or we could have said, we're just going to grant you a new bucket of 80 hours on January 1, 2021. We went with door number 2. We decided to roll over the time in anticipation that at some point, the state of California would pass a new supplemental law, which they did in March, retroactive to January 1, and we were able to absorb that rollover time into the 80 hours for this year. And so on the aspect of just trying to be a little bit ahead of the game, anticipate that it's going to be there. Now, I don't know that it'll be extended beyond September 30th with all the rules being relaxed, but if it is, then we'll be prepared for that as well. One important thing to note beyond just granting the time is evaluating and implementing requests to use the time. We've been extremely lenient, as far as I'm concerned, on allowing employees to use their supplemental sick time for a COVID-related reason. So we're not really hammering down, well, we really need to explore that need to use it for childcare. You need to provide proof that your school is closed, or you need to provide proof that you're having, you know, you're in a high-risk group. We've been pretty much taking the employee's word for it. Again, we don't want to be the tip of the spear that we denied supplemental paid sick leave required under California law and then have to justify our decision not to allow it in a particular circumstance. Without a lot of reported cases and decisions on the application of those laws, when in doubt, we're allowing the employee to use that time.
Very wise. That's a good policy, in my opinion, unless someone wants to be the guinea pig for these issues. One thing I want to highlight also to the audience and what you want to keep in mind with respect to time off policies and COVID is, especially since I know that some of our audience members are not necessarily in California and you're in other states, childcare issues. Many states have adopted state-specific statutes that or requirements. And most of them are temporary because of COVID, but they require that you give your employees a certain amount of time off for childcare reasons. Also, they might impose a duty to reasonably accommodate an employee who cannot come back to work or who cannot work because of childcare reasons. So again, kind of the theme of our session, I think, is making sure you know what the requirements are for your locality. And if you have an employee who cannot come back to work because their child is or children are at home learning remotely, and someone needs to stay home with them because, you know, little Billy and Susie can't be left home all day long because, you know, they're 6 and 8. Well, what are the legal requirements for the employer for an employee in that situation? And so you're going to want to make sure to know the legal requirements. You can contact competent outside legal counsel and find out, okay, what do we need to do in this situation? Speaking of which, Paul,
I want to piggyback on that as well, because that's been a topic that we've talked quite a bit about with returning back to the workplace and the impact on working mothers in particular. So we're very cognizant of the fact that, you know, for the most part, a lot of the child care issues will fall on the mother and not on the father. And they may have those continuing concerns where if all of their male colleagues have returned to the office because they don't have a child care issue and they're plugging away and they're in front of the boss, how would that impact merit increases, bonuses, promotional opportunities, a view of the work ethic of the particular individual? And we have taken great steps to make sure we continually train and educate our managers that if someone is being accommodated and they're working from home due to a child care requirement, the work they produce is no less significant than the work that someone produces who is in the office. We want to make sure that we don't have any disparate treatment of any employee because for whatever reason, whether it's a medical accommodation or otherwise, they have to work from home. The other thing that we did as a company is we sought out and obtained a vendor that we bought a certain number of child care days for use by any of our employees that run into an unexpected child care issue if they're an employee who is either customer facing and already working on site or needs to return to the workplace. So they have the ability to say, oh, I ran into a problem and for the next 2 days I don't have child care. That's provided by our vendor. And again, we purchased a certain number of days for 2021 to be used by our employees, and we'll have to gauge the value of that program, how much it was utilized, whether we bought too many days, did we buy too little days, and whether or not we're going to continue that program going into the future. So there are vendors out there that will provide what we think is a relatively inexpensive way to assist our employees who have a child care issue in being able to return to the workplace.
And I think that's excellent. There is no doubt, there's no question from my personal experience of advising employers that just as you stated, across the board, this childcare schooling issue has had a massive impact on women having to take a step back in their career, stay home with their children so they can do the remote learning. And it's been very challenging for families. I'm proud to say and brag, and as I'm sure Rob and Steve, who are probably on this with Pacific Premier Bank, because I pretty much told all my clients this. My son hated remote learning, like absolutely hated it. And I hated it. It was awful. I did not like it. And he's social, I'm social. It was disastrous. And so the moment that the waiver came out in California, where you could apply for certain private schools and public schools could apply for a waiver so that your children can go back to school. I was all over the waiver. I was contacting the health department daily. I was contacting my son's school daily. And so the big joke at my son's school is that some moms like bring cookies and apple juice, and other moms, help get legal waivers. That's just, we all play our part. So my son's school was the first.
My wife tried to homeschool both of our sons during the pandemic, but at 35 and 32, they refused, and both of their wives agreed. So she couldn't get the two boys back home.
Yes. Well, I have to say my son's school was the first batch of Orange County schools to get the legal waiver. Yes, I was very actively involved in making sure that happened and we got him back to school. But anyway, I think that's excellent that the company is you're being extremely proactive about the child care issue. And I would encourage everyone here, as a takeaway, to go back to your organizations. And maybe even to yourself, maybe this applies to even you, what is out there to help with the childcare issues, because that's really important. I know that we're almost out of time, so I have one last question for you, Paul. There is so much to keep track of, so many changing views, regulations, requirements, health orders, I mean, you name it. How can you advise the audience members? What is a good way to kind of keep track of all of this? What have you been doing to stay so knowledgeable and so up to date on these ever-changing issues?
Yeah, it's really difficult. No one person can do it. That's why we have a task force, and it's not just a task person. I probably would not be here if they said, Paul, you're the COVID czar, and you have to figure it all out and work with outside counsel. So our team has about 7 members across our organization. So from HR, from legal, from risk management, from the various business operating units, from office services, security, we all bring a different perspective. We all have ownership of keeping each other advised as to anything emerging in our areas. We have a real robust pipeline of communication we get from our outside counsel and other sources as to what's happening and emerging. I mean, when the OSHA guidelines come out tomorrow afternoon, I'm probably going to get 12 emails. I'll probably get 3 from Candace's law firm, from various people within the law firm. And then we immediately share it with the task force so that we can take that new information and put it up on our matrix of the different rules and regulations and how they all interact and interplay. We even have someone on our task force who's in our legal division whose primary responsibility is to follow all of the color tiered for the various counties where we operate in California and update that matrix weekly and circulate it to the members of the task force so we know what our employees must and cannot do in the various areas where we operate. So it has to be a team approach. You have to have a location where you could have shared documents and, have somebody, designated for each particular area to maintain the documentation up to date.
No, that's wonderful. And then I'll just chime in before we open it up to a question or two, if there are any. I do want to thank Rob for inviting me to speak here today. Pacific Premier Bank is a wonderful client. I love working with them. We've had a great relationship for many years and hopefully many years to come. And with that, I'll turn it over to any questions, however that works, if there are any.
There are no questions at this time in the chat box. So if you guys do have any questions for the panel, please feel free to type those in the chat box, either to everyone or just directly to me. And if not, we can follow up after the fact and we can get you in contact with the panel if that works as well. But there's no questions at this time.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Paul, for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Paul and Candace, for that very informative discussion. I'll just turn it over to you, Mike.
Great. Thank you, Candace, Paul, and Rob. Very timely, very informative presentation. Thank you very much.